Sacred Wild Souls. We are
Good
on week
morning.
two of The Secret of Shambhala. It's the third book in the Celestine Prophecy series, and I'm super excited to continue our journey here. I love
Yes.
this book series. It has been just so throughout my entire life. I remember first reading it when I was 19, and my mind was blown. I was like, oh my God, I'm not crazy. I am not the only one that thinks like this or sees the world like this or experiences this.
Yeah.
All right. We are on page 17. And Des, are you good if I start?
Yeah, absolutely, honey.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. At 7:55, I walked out the door of the main lobby with only one satchel. The hotel had agreed to do everything else. My plan was to be back within the week, unless, of course, something strange happened once I left with Yin. In that case, I would be back immediately. Exactly on time, Yin drove up in an old Toyota, and we headed toward the airport. On the way over, he was cordial, but he continued to plead ignorance as to what was going on with Will. I considered telling him what Natalie had said about the mysterious place in Central Asia and what Will had told me that night in my bedroom, just to see Yin's reaction, but I decided against it. Better to just watch Yin closely, I thought, and see how things felt at the airport. At the ticket desk, I found that a seat had indeed been purchased in my name for a flight to Lhasa. I looked around and tried to feel out the situation. Everything seemed normal. Yin was smiling, obviously in a good mood. Unfortunately, the ticket clerk was not. She could speak only a little English and was very demanding. When she asked for my passport, I became even more irritated and snapped back at her. At one point, she stopped and glared at me as though she was going to refuse to issue the ticket altogether. Yin quickly stepped in and talked to her in a calm voice in her native Nepalese. After a few moments, her demeanor began to change. She never looked at me again, but she spoke pleasantly to Yin, actually laughing at something he said. A few minutes later, we had our tickets and boarding passes and were sitting at a small table in a coffee shop near our gate. There was the strong smell of cigarettes everywhere. You have much anger, Yin said, and you don't use your energy very well. I was taken aback. What are you talking about? He looked at me with kindness. I mean, you did nothing to help the woman at the counter with her mood. I immediately knew what he was getting at. In Peru, the eighth insight had described a method of uplifting others by focusing on their faces in a particular way. You know the insights? I asked. Yin nodded, still looking at me. Yes, he said, but there is more. Remembering to send energy is not that easy, I added defensively. In a very deliberate tone, Yin said, but you must realize that you are already influencing her with your energy anyway, whether you know it or not. The important thing is how you set your field of Yin was struggling to find the English word. Field of intention, he said finally. Your prayer field. I looked at him hard. Yin seemed to be describing prayer in the same way the dark-haired man had earlier. What are you talking about exactly? I asked. Have you ever been in a room with people where the energy and mood were low, and then someone comes in who lifts everyone's energy immediately, just by entering the room? This person's energy field goes out ahead of him or her and touches everyone else. Yeah, I said, I know what you mean. His look penetrated me. If you are going to find Shambhala, you must learn how to do this consciously. Shambhala, what are you talking about? Yin's face grew pale, exuding an expression of embarrassment. He shook his head, apparently feeling as though he had overstepped himself and let something out of the bag. Never mind, he said slowly. It's not my place. Will must explain this. The line was forming to enter the plane, and Yin turned away and moved toward the ticket steward. I was racking my brain trying to place the word Shambhala. Finally, it came to me. Shambhala was the mythical community of Tibetan Buddhist lore, the one that the stories about Shangri-La had been based on. I caught Yin's eye. That place is a myth, right? Yin just handed the steward his ticket and walked down the aisle. On the flight to Lhasa, Yin and I sat in different sections of the plane, giving me time to think. All I knew was that Shambhala was of great significance to the Tibetan Buddhists, whose ancient writings described it as a holy city of diamonds and gold, filled with adepts and lamas, and hidden somewhere in the vast, uninhabitable regions of northern Tibet or China. Most recently, though, most Buddhists seem to speak of Shambhala merely in symbolic terms, as representing a spiritual state of mind, not a real location. I reached over and pulled a travel brochure of Tibet from the pouch on the seat back, hoping to get a renewed sense of its geography. Lying between China to the north and India and Nepal to the south, Tibet is basically a large plateau with few areas lower than 6,000 feet. At its southern border are the towering Himalayas, including Mount Everest, and on the northern border, just inside China, are the vast Kunlun Mountains. In between are deep gorges, wild rivers, and hundreds of square miles of rocky tundra. From the map, eastern Tibet seemed to be the most fertile and populated, while the north and west looked sparse and mountainous, with few roads, all of them gravel. Apparently, there are only two major routes into western Tibet: the northern road, used mostly by truckers, and the southern road, which skirts the Himalayas and is used by pilgrims from all over the region to reach the sacred sites of Everest, Lake Manasorovar, and Mount Kailash, and farther on to the mysterious Kunluns. I looked from my reading. As we flew along at 35,000 feet, I began to sense a distinct shift in temperature and energy outside. Below me, the Himalayas rose in frozen rocky spires framed by a clear blue sky. We practically flew right over the top of Mount Everest as we passed into the airspace of Tibet, the land of snows, the rooftop of the world. It was a nation of seekers, inward travelers, and as I looked down at the green valleys and rocky plains surrounded by mountains, I couldn't help being awed by its beauty. Too bad it was now being brutally administered by a totalitarian government. What, I wondered, was I doing here? I looked back at Yin, seated 4 rows behind me. It bothered me that he was being so secretive. I made up my mind, again, to be very cautious. I would not go any farther than Lhasa without a full explanation. When we arrived at the airport, Yin resisted all my inquiries about Shambhala, repeating his assertion that soon we would be met by Will, at which point I would learn everything. We caught a taxi and headed toward a small hotel near the center of town where Will would be waiting. I caught Yin staring at me. What? I asked. I was just checking to see how you are adjusting to the altitude, Yin said. Lhasa is 12,000 feet above sea level. You must take it easy for a while. I nodded, appreciating his concern, but in the past I had always adapted easily to high altitudes. I was about to mention this to Yin when I caught sight of a huge fortress-like structure in the distance. This is the Potala Palace, Yin said. I wanted you to see it. It was the Dalai Lama's winter home before he was exiled. It now symbolizes the struggle of the Tibetan people against the Chinese occupation. He looked away and remained silent until the car stopped, not in front of the hotel, but down the street 100 feet. Will should be here already, Yin said as he opened the door. Wait in the taxi, I'll go in and check. But instead of getting out, he stopped and stared at the entrance. I saw his look and gazed in that direction myself. The street was busy with Tibetan pedestrians and a few tourists, but all seemed normal. Then my eyes fell on a short Chinese man near the corner of the building. He held a paper of some kind, but his eyes were carefully surveying the area. Yin looked toward the cars parked on the curb across the street from the man. His eyes stopped on an old brown sedan containing several men in suits. Yin said something to the taxi driver, who looked nervously at us in the rearview mirror and drove toward the next intersection. As we drove on, Yin bent over so as not to be seen by the men in the car. What's going on? I asked. Yin ignored me, telling the driver to turn left and head farther into the center of the city. I grabbed his arm. Yin, tell me what's going on. Who are those men? I don't know, he said, but Will would not be there. There is one other place I think he would go. Watch and see if we are being followed. I looked behind us as Yin gave the taxi driver more instructions. Several cars came up behind us, but then turned off. There was no sign of the brown sedan. Do you see anyone back there? Yin asked, turning to look for himself. I don't think so, I replied. I was about to question Yin again about what was happening when I noticed that his hands were shaking. I took a good look at his face. It was pale and covered with sweat. I realized that he was terrified. The sight sent a chill of fear through my own body. Before I could speak, Yin pointed out a parking place for the taxi driver and pushed me out of the car with my satchel, leading me down a side street and then into a narrow alley. After walking 100 feet or so, we leaned against the wall of a building and waited for several minutes, our eyes glued to the entrance of the street we had just left. Neither of us spoke a word. When it appeared as though we were not being followed, Yin proceeded down the alley to the next building and knocked several times. There was no answer, but the lock on the door mysteriously opened from the inside. Wait here, Yin said, opening the door. I'll be back. He moved silently into the building and shut the door. When I heard it lock, a wave of panic filled me. Now what? I thought. Yin was scared. Was he abandoning me out here? I looked back down the alley, toward the crowded street. This was exactly what I had feared most. Someone seemed to be looking for Yin, and maybe Will too. I had no idea what I might be getting involved in. Perhaps it would be best if Yin did vanish, I thought. That way, I could run back to the street and hide among the crowd until I found my way back to the airport. What else could I do then but go back home? I would be absolved of all responsibility to look for Will or do anything else in this misadventure. The door suddenly opened. Ian slid out and the door was quickly locked. Will left a message, Ian said. Come on. We walked a bit farther down the alley and hid between two large trash bins as Yin opened an envelope and pulled out a note. When he finished, he held the note out toward me. What does it say? I demanded, grabbing the paper. I recognized Will's handwriting as I read. Yin, I'm convinced we are being allowed into Shambhala, but I must go on ahead. It is of utmost importance that you bring our American friend as far as you can. You know the Dakini will guide you. Will. I looked at Yin, who glanced at me for a moment and then looked away. What does he mean, allowed into Shambhala? He means figuratively, right? He doesn't think it's a real place, does he? Yin was staring at the ground. Of course, Will thinks it's a real place, he whispered. Do you? I asked. He looked away, appearing as though the weight of the world had been placed on his shoulders. Yes, he said. Only it has been impossible for most people to ever conceive of this place, much less get there. Certainly you and I cannot. His voice trailed off into silence. Yin, I said, you have to tell me what's going on. What is Will doing? Who are these men we saw at the hotel? Yin stared at me for a moment and then said, I think they are Chinese intelligence officers. What? I don't know what they are doing here. Apparently, they have been alerted by all the activity and talk about Shambhala. Many of the lamas here realize that something is changing with this holy place. There has been much discussion. Changing how? Tell me. Yin took a deep breath. I wanted to let Will explain this, but I guess now I must try. You must understand what Shambhala is. The people there are live human beings born into this holy place, but they are of a higher evolutionary state. They help hold energy and vision for the whole world. I looked away, thinking about the 10th insight. They're spiritual guides of some kind? Not like you think, Yin replied. They aren't like family members or other souls in the afterlife that might be helping us from that dimension. They are human beings who live right here on this earth. Those in Shambhala have an extraordinary community and live at a higher level of development. They model what the rest of the world will ultimately achieve. That's always been like a thought of mine, an imagining of mine, that there's this entirely like our idea of different planets and different dimensions and different, all of this isn't what we think. Like there's no need for a time traveling machine or a teleportation device. Everything's right here. And that it's not about changing our environment and energy in the outside, but doing it within and allowing it to be changed on the outside.
Yeah.
I mean, just like as I've grown and evolved and changed and expanded over this journey, being able to recognize how much is here for me that I didn't see before. Like all of the support, all of the love, all of the guides, all of the everything, the money, the resources, all of it has always been right here. I just didn't have the eyes to see it. My energy wasn't at a level to vibrate at a frequency that matched what was here. And as my energy expands and as my like frequency gets more fine-tuned and in harmony with that which I'm guided and guided to, then it starts opening up those doors and those portals, but it's all right here,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
I think with that, I'll go ahead and pass on to you.
Okay. Where is this place? I don't know. Do you know anyone who has seen it? No. As a boy, I studied with the great Lama, who declared one day that he was going to Shambhala, and after days of celebration, he left. Did he get there? No one knows. He disappeared and was never seen again anywhere in Tibet. Then no one really knows whether it exists or not. Yin was silent for a moment, then said, We have the legends. Who's we? He stared at me. I could tell that he was restricted by some kind of code of silence. I cannot tell you that. Only the head of our only the head of our sect, Lama Bridgden, could choose to talk with you. What are the legends? I can only tell you this. The legends are the sayings left by those who have attempted to reach Shambhala in the past. They are centuries old. Yin was about to say something else when a sound toward the street drew our attention. We watched closely but saw no one. Wait here, Yin said. Again, Yin knocked on the door and disappeared inside. Just as quickly as just as quickly he emerged and walked over to an old rusty Jeep with a ragged canvas top. He opened the door and waved for me to get in. Come on, he said. We must hurry. Oh, chapter 2, the
Yeah.
call of Shambhala. As Yin began to drive out of Lhasa, I was silent, looking out the mountains and wondering what Will had meant by his no. Why had he decided to go alone? And who were the Dakini? I was about to ask Yin when a Chinese military truck crossed at the intersection in front of us. The sight gave me a jolt, and I felt a wave of nervousness begin to fill my body. What was I doing? We had just seen intelligent officers staking out the hotel where we were supposed to meet Will. They might be looking for us. Wait a minute, Yin, I said. I want to go to an airport. All this seems too dangerous for me. Yin looked at me with alarm. What about Will? He said. You read the note? He needs you. Yeah, well, he's used to this kind of stuff. I'm not sure he would expect me to put myself in danger like this. You already are in danger. We must get out of Lhasa. Where are you going? I asked. To Lama Regent's Ridgeden Monastery near
Shigatsi,
Sigatsi?
maybe?
Sigatsi? It will be late when I get there. When we get there. Is there a phone there? I asked. Yes, Yin replied. I believe so, if it's working. I nodded and Yin turned back to the road. Concrete, wait, back
To
to the concentrate on the road.
concentrate on the road. Yeah.
Yes, back to concentrate on the road. That's fine, I thought. I wouldn't hurt to get far away from here before making arrangements to get home. For hours, he bounced along with the badly paved highway, passing trucks and old cars along the way. The scenery was a mix of ugly industrial developments and beautiful vistas. Well, after dark, Yin of a pulled up into the yard of a small concrete block house. A big woolly dog was tied to the side of a mechanic's garage to the right, barking at us furiously. Is this Lama Rizden's house? I asked. No, of course not, Ian said. But I know the people here. We could pick up some food and gasoline that we might need later. I'll be right back. I watched as Ian walked up to the board steps and knocked on the door. An older Tibetan woman came out and immediately pulled Yin into a full embrace. Yin pointed at me, smiled, and said something I couldn't understand. He waved for me, and I got out and walked into the house. A moment later, we heard the faint squeaks of a car brakes outside. Yin darted across the room and pulled back the curtains to look. I stood right behind him. In the darkness, I could see a black unmarked car sitting on the side of the road across the rutted driveway, 100 feet away. Who is that? I asked. I don't know, Yin replied. Go out and get our packs quickly. I looked at him questioningly. It's okay, he said. Go get them, but hurry. I walked out the door and over to the Jeep, trying not to look toward the car in the distance. I reached through the open window and grabbed my satchel and Yin's pack, and then briskly walked back inside. Yin was still watching out the window. Oh my, he said suddenly. They're coming. A blast of car lights lit the window as the car raced toward the house. Grabbing his pack from me with one hand, Yin led the way out the back door and into the darkness. We must go this way, Yin yelled back at me as he led me up a path into a group of rocky hills. I glanced back down at the house and, to my horror, saw plainclothes agents piling out of the car and encircling the residence. Another car we hadn't even seen sped up around the side of the house, and several more men jumped out and began to the slope toward run up the slope to our right. I knew if we kept going in the direction we were going, they would cut us off in minutes. Yin, wait a minute, I said in a loud whisper. They're heading us off. He stopped and put his face very close to mine in the darkness. To the left, he said, we'll go around them. As he said that, I caught sight of the other agents running in that direction. If we followed Yin's route, they would see us for sure. I looked straight up the most rugged part of the incline. Something caught my eye. A dim patch of the trail was percep- perceptibly lighter. No, we have to go straight up, I said instinctively, and headed in that direction. Yin lagged behind me for an instant, and then followed. We made our way up the rocks, with the agents closing in from the right. At the top of the rise, an agent seemed to be right up on top of us, and we ducked between two large boulders. The area around us was still precisely lighter. The man was no more than 30 feet away, moving around to where he would soon see us clearly. Then, as he approached the edges of the slight glow, seconds from seeing us, he abruptly stopped, started to walk forward again, then stopped again, as if suddenly having other ideas. Without taking another step, he turned and ran back down the hill. After a few moments, I asked Yin in a whisper if he thought the agent had seen us. No, Yin replied. I don't think so. Come on. We climbed the hill for another 10 minutes before stopping on preci-
Precipice.
a stony precipice to look. That's a weird one.
Yeah.
Precipice to look back down at the house. We could see more official looking cars driving up. One was an older police car with a blinking red light. The scene filled with terror. The scene filled me with terror. No doubt about it now. These people were after us. Yun was also looking anxiously toward the house, his hands again shaking. What are they going to do with your friend? I asked her, horrified at what he might say. Yin looked at me with tears and fury in his eyes, then led the way further up the hill.
Hmm. That's so sad.
Yeah.
Like just like what fear does, because it's all fear.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and through that fear we become that which we're afraid of, as if it's this like protection, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I become what I'm afraid of, then what I'm afraid of can't come after me.
Yeah.
And then in this, primarily intentioned effort to protect ourselves, we become that which needs to be protected against.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just gets too scary to see that.
Yeah.
It's too much responsibility, too much weight to be able to see that we've become that. And so we
Mm-hmm.
do everything we can to avoid seeing it.
Yeah.
And it turns into this vicious cycle
Mm-hmm.
where the answer again always comes to like, you're the one you've been waiting for. Only you can save you because it's you that decided to turn into what you turned into.
Yeah.
Nobody else can do that for you, just like nobody else made you this. Even
Mm-hmm.
if you were given the shittiest hand as a child, right? I mean, I say that from experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's at some point we become adults that take responsibility for our lives,
Yeah.
regardless of what we were given. And then to see the people who are there supporting and helping the ones that are finding these different secrets and things that are here to support a better and more expansive world. And in that journey of helping and supporting, they end up getting hurt by the ones that are, angry and controlling and avoiding.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all just fear. That's it.
Yep. Yeah. Yes. All right. We walked for several more hours, making our way by the light of a quarter moon that was periodically obscured by clouds. I wanted to ask about legends Yin, and I wanted to ask about the legends Yin had mentioned, but he remained angry and sullen. At the top of the hill, Yin stopped and announced that we must rest. As I sat down on a nearby rock, he walked off into the darkness a dozen feet or so and stood with his back toward me. Why were you so sure, he asked without turning around, that we should climb straight up the hill back there? I took a breath. I saw something. I stammered. The area was lighter somehow. It seemed the way to go. He turned and walked over and sat down on the ground across from me. Have you seen such a thing before? My I tried to shake away my anxiety. My heart was pounding and I could barely walk. Yeah, I have, I said several times recently. He looked away and was silent. Ian, do you know what is happening? The legends would say we are being helped. Helped by whom? Again, he just looked away. Ian, tell me what you know about this. He did not respond. Is it the Dakini that Will mentioned in his note? Still no response. I felt a rush of anger. Yin, tell me what you know. He stood up quickly and glared at me. Some things are some things we are forbidden to speak of. Don't you understand? Just mentioning the names of these beings frivolously can leave a man mute for years or blind. They are the guardians of Shambhala. He stormed over to the flat rock, spread his jacket, and lay down. I felt exhausted too, unable to think. We must sleep, Bien said. Please, you will know more tomorrow. I looked at him for a moment longer, then lay down on the rock where I was sitting and fell into a deep sleep. I was awakened by a shaft of light rising between two snowy peaks in the distance. Looking around, I realized that Yin was gone. I jumped up and searched the immediate area, my body aching all over. Yin was nowhere I could see. Damn, I thought. I had no way of knowing where I was. A deep wave of anxiety rushed through me. I waited for 30 minutes looking out at the brown, rocky hills with little valleys of green grass, and still he had not returned. Then I stood up again and noticed for the first time that down the slope about 400 feet was a gravel road. I grabbed my satchel and walked down through the rocks until I reached the road and then headed north. As best I could remember, that was the direction back toward Lhasa. I hadn't gone a half mile before I noticed that there were 4 or 5 people less than 100 paces behind me, heading in the same direction. I immediately left the road and moved well up into the rocks so I would be hidden but could still watch them pass. When they reached me, I realized that it was a family made up of an old man, a man and a woman about 30, and 2 teenage boys. They were carrying large rocks, and the younger man was pulling a cart filled with possessions. They looked like refugees. I thought about approaching them and at least finding out which way to go, but I decided against it. I was afraid they might report me later, and so I let them go by. I waited another 20 minutes and carefully walked in the same direction. For about 2 miles, the road weaved its way through the small rocky hills and plateaus. Until the distance, at the top of one of the hills, I could see a monastery. I moved off the road and climbed through the rocks until I was about 200 yards below it. It was made of sandy-colored brick with a flat roof painted brown and had two wings, one on each side of the main building. I could see no movement, and at first I thought the place was empty. But then the door at the front opened, and I saw a monk, adorned in a bright red robe, come out and begin to work in a garden near a lone tree to the right of the building. He looked harmless enough, but I decided to take no chances. I walked back to the gravel road, crossed it, and made a wide berth around the left side of the monastery until I was well past. Then I carefully proceeded up the road again, stopping only to take off my parka. The sun was beating down now, and it was surprisingly warm. After about a mile, I was about to crest a small rise in the road. I heard something. I ran into the rocks in an instant. At first, I thought it was a bird, but slowly I realized it was someone talking, far in the distance. Who? Taking great care, I moved up through the rocks until I had a higher position, then peeked over at a small valley below. My heart froze. Below me was a gravel crossroads at which were parked three military jeeps. Perhaps a dozen soldiers stood around smoking cigarettes and talking. I backed away, keeping low, and walked the way I came I had come until I found a place to hide between two rocky mounds. From there I heard something else in the distance out beyond the roadblock. It was a low drone at first and then whirling, clapping a sound I recognized. It was a helicopter. Panicked, I ran through the rocks as fast as I could, away from the road. I crossed a small stream and slipped, drenching my pants up to my knees. I jumped up and started to run again. When my foot slipped on one of the rocks, I careened down a hill, ripping my pants and gouging my legs. Struggling to my feet, I kept running, looking for a better place to hide. As the helicopter closed, I bounded over another small rise and was looking back when someone grabbed me and pulled me down into a small gorge. It was Yin. We lay perfectly still as the large helicopter flew directly over us. It's a Z it's a Z9, Yin said. His face looked panicked, but I could tell he was also furious. Why did you leave where we were camped? He half shouted. You left me, I responded. I was gone less than an hour. You should have waited. The fear and anger exploded in me. Honey, I need my chapstick, please. Waited. Why didn't you tell me you were going? I wasn't through, but I could hear the helicopter turning in the distance. What are we going to do? I asked Yin. We can't stay here. Back to the monastery, he said. That's where I was before. I nodded, then raised up and looked for the helicopter. Thank you. Luckily, it was veering off to the north. At the same time, something else caught my eye. It was a monk. It was the monk I had seen earlier, moving down the hill, down the glitch towards us. He walked up to us and said nothing. The Yin and Tibetan then looked at me. Come, please, he said in English, grabbing me, pulling me toward the monastery. When we arrived, we first walked through a side courtyard gate and past many Tibetans standing with bags and various belongings. Some of them looked very poor. Then we reached the main building of the monastery, and the monk opened the large wooden doors and led us through an entry room where more Tibetans were gathered. As we walked by, I recognized one group. It was a family I had left past me on the road earlier. They looked at me with warm eyes. Yin saw me looking at them and questioned me about it. I explained that I had seen them back on the road. They were there to lead you here, Yin said, but you were too afraid to follow the synchronicity. He glanced at the Sterling and then continued to follow the monk into a small study with bookcases and desk, several prayer rolls. We were then seated around an or ornately carved wooden table where the monk Indian carried on an extensive conversation in Tibetan. Let me see your leg, another monk asked in English from behind us. He carried a small basket filled with white bandages and several dropper bottles. Yin's face lit up. You two know each other? I asked. Please, the monk said, offering his hand while bowing slightly. I am Jampa. Yin leaned toward me. Jampa has been with Lama Rijden for over 10 years. Who is Lama Rijden? Both Jampa and Yin looked up at each other. Yin looked at each other as though not sure how much to tell. Finally, Yin said, I mentioned the legends to you earlier. Lama Rijden understands the legends more than any other person. He is one of the foremost experts of Shambhala. Tell me what exactly happened. Jump, Jampa said to me as he dabbed some kind of salve on my scrapped leg. I looked at Yin, who nodded for me to comply. I must present what has happened to you to the Lama, Jampa, terrified. I proceeded to tell him everything that had occurred since arriving at Lhasa. When I finished, Jampa looked at me. What about before you came to Tibet? What happened? I told him about my neighbor's daughter and Will, about my neighbor's daughter and about Will. He and Yin looked at each other. And what have you been thinking? Jampa asked. I've been thinking that I'm over my head here, I said. I'm planning to head to the airport. No, that's not what I mean, Jampa said quickly. This morning, when you discovered that Yin had left, what was your attitude, your state of mind? I was scared. I just knew the Chinese would be on me in minutes. I tried to figure out how to get back to Lhasa. Jampa turned and looked at Yin, frowning. He doesn't know about the prayer fields? Yin shook his head and looked away. We've discussed it, I said, but I'm not sure how it matters. What do you know about these helicopters? Are they after us? Jampa only smiled and told me not to worry, that I would be safe here. We were interpreted by several other monks delivering soup, bread, and tea. As we ate, my mind seemed to clear and I began to assess the situation. I wanted to know everything about what was going on right now. I looked at Jampa with determination and he returned my gaze with a profound warmth. I know you have many questions, he said. Let me tell you as much as I can. We are a special sect here in Tibet. Not typically. For many centuries we have held the belief that Shambhala is a real place. We also hold the knowledge of the legends, verbal wisdom as old as the Kala chakra, which is devoted to the integration of the religious truth. Many of our lamas are in touch with Shambhala through their dreams. A few months ago, your friend Will began to show up in Lama Virgin's dream of Shambhala. A short time after that, Will was led to this very monastery. Lama Virgin agreed to see him and found out Will was also having dreams of Shambhala. What did Will tell him? I asked. Where did he go? He shook his head. I'm afraid you must wait and see if Lama Virgin will give you that information himself. I looked at Yin, and he attempted to smile. What about the Chinese? I asked Jampa. How are they involved? Jampa shrugged. We don't know. Perhaps they some Perhaps they know something about what is happening. I nodded. There's one more thing, Jampa said. Apparently in all the dreams there appears another person, an American. Jampa paused and bowed slightly. Your friend, Will, wasn't sure about. He thought it was you. After bathing and changing clothes in the room Jampa had provided, I walked out into the backyard. Several monks were working in a vegetable garden, as though the Chinese were of no concern. I looked out at the mountains and surveyed the sky. No helicopters anywhere. Would you like to sit on the bench up there? A voice spoke from behind me. I turned and saw Yin walking out the door. I nodded and we walked up several terraces filled with ornamental plants and vegetables until we reached a sitting area facing an elaborate Buddhist shrine. A large mountain range framed the horizon behind us, but toward the south we had a panoramic view of the countryside for miles. Many people were walking on the roads or pulling carts. Where is the Lama? I asked. I don't know, Yin replied. He has not yet agreed to see you. Why not? Yin shook his head. I don't know. Do you think he knows where Will is? Again, Yin shook his head. Do you think the Chinese are still looking for us? I asked. Yin only shrugged, looking out into the distance. I'm sorry my energy is so bad, he said. Please don't let it influence you. It's just that my anger overwhelms me. Since 1954, the Chinese have systematically set out to destroy the Tibetan culture. Look at the Look at those people walking out there. Many of them are farmers who are displaced because of economic initiatives the Chinese have mandated. Others are nomads who are starving because these policies have interrupted their way of life. He clenched both fists. The Chinese are doing the same things Stalin did in Manchuria, importing importing thousands of outsiders, in this case ethnic Chinese, into Tibet to change the cultural balance and institute Chinese ways. They demand that our schools teach only the Chinese language. The people outside the gates of the monastery, I asked, why do they come here? Lama Rijin had the monks are working to help the poor, who are having the worst time with the transition of their culture. That is why the Chinese have left him alone. He helped solve the problems without agitating the populace against them. Yin said this is in a way that reflected a mild resentment against the Lama, and immediately he apologized. No, he said, I didn't mean to imply that the Lama is cooperating too much. It's just that what the Chinese are doing is despicable. He clenched his fist again and hit his knees. Many thought at first that the Chinese government would be respectful of Tibetan ways, that we could exist with the Chinese nation without losing everything, but the government is bent on destroying us. This is clear now, and we must begin to make it more difficult for them. Can I pass it on to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It's such a perfect space. I mean, it's what we were talking about a little earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we start fighting against,
Yeah.
we become what we're fighting against, and we just
Yeah.
exacerbate the problem because, the thing that we want to change stems from separation and violence and hate.
Mm-hmm.
And when we try to fix the problem, that in and of itself is separation, violence, and hate,
Yeah.
compassion and acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I understand both sides, right? The space in which the Lama is helping without causing disruption or chaos, as well as the space in which, like, there's anger. Like, why are you making it easy for this to continue? Why not fight and resist?
Yeah.
Ugh. You mean try to fight them? I asked. Yin, you know you can't win that. I know, he said. I just get so angry when I think of what they are doing. Someday the warriors of Shambhala will ride out and defeat those monsters of evil. What? It is a prophecy among my people. He looked at me and shook his head. I know I must work on my anger. It collapses my prayer field. Abruptly, he stood up and added, I'll go ask Jampa if he has talked with the Lama. Please excuse me. He bowed slightly and left. For a while, I looked out at the Tibetan landscape, trying to comprehend fully the damage the Chinese occupation had done. At one point, I even thought I heard another helicopter, but it was too far away to be sure. I knew Yin's anger was justified, and I thought for several more minutes about the realities of the political situation in Tibet. The thought of asking for a phone came back to mind, and I wondered how hard it would be to place an international call. I was about to get up and head inside when I realized I felt tired. So I took a couple of deep breaths and tried to focus on the beauty around me. The snow-capped mountains and the green and brown colors of the landscape were stark and beautiful, and the sky was a rich blue with only a few clouds along the western horizon. As I gazed out, I noticed that the two monks were several tiers down below me were staring intently up in my direction. I glanced behind me to see if there was something up there, but I could see nothing unusual. I smiled back at their direction. After a few minutes, one of them walked up the stone steps toward me carrying a basket full of hand tools. When he reached me, he nodded politely and began to weed a bed of flowers 20 feet to my right. Several minutes later, he was joined by another monk, who began digging as well. Occasionally, they would look over at me with inquiring eyes and deferential nods. I took more deep breaths and focused on the far distance again, thinking about what Yin had said concerning was prayer field. He was worried that his anger against the Chinese collapsed his energy. What did he mean by that? Suddenly, I began to feel the warmth of the sun and to sense its radiance more consciously, feeling a certain peacefulness I hadn't felt since coming here. I took another breath with my eyes closed and perceived something else. An unusually sweet fragrance like a bouquet of flowers. My first thought was that the monks had clipped some of the blooms off the plants they were working on and had placed them near me. I opened my eyes and looked, but there were no flowers close by. I felt for a breeze that might have blown the fragrance over toward me, but there was none stirring. I noticed the monks had dropped their tools and were staring intensely at me with wide eyes and their mouths half open, as though they had seen something strange. Again, I looked behind me, trying to figure out what was going on. Upon noticing that they had disturbed me, they quickly gathered up their tools and baskets and almost ran down the path toward the monastery. I followed them with my eyes for a moment, watching their red robes flip and sway as they glanced back to see if I was watching. And I think that that is a good space to stop.
Okay.
Isn't that?
Yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. No,
No.
go ahead. You're good.
No, I was just gonna say about taking in the beauty of the nature, right? Being able to just go outside for a moment and to remember that we have access to that no matter where, even if we're in the city, even if we're
Mm-hmm.
wherever, it just takes a tree, the sky, the
Mm-hmm.
sun, like there's nowhere you can go in which you don't have access to something outside.
Mm-hmm.
Just breathe it in for a moment. And then the other piece was a sister of mine that I've been working with. Her name's Sheena. She has intentionally began to start saying prayer in the double syllable instead of prayer, right? Saying prayer, right? So I am a prayer, not just like the thing, right? The prayer, but an actual action, or this noun of I am a prayer, right?
Mm-hmm.
A person who prays, a
Mm-hmm.
prayer. My words are a prayer. My life is a prayer, just like all of these, the way she was talking about being so intentional with that word. I really, really enjoy that. And I'm excited to step into the prayer field or the field of intention.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That anger that we hold sometimes it came out this last week a few times, and it just, when I noticed it happened twice, and I just was like, why do I have that anger? Like, why is that coming out? Like, I have not even acted that way um in a very long time. And it's just like I'm trying to figure out why I lashed out on them and what triggered me to do all of those things, like I'm no longer that person. Like, I don't do those things. I don't yell at somebody for no reason, but it just felt like one thing was happening after another, and then that last straw, you know I just lashed out and I couldn't hold it in. But I know there's other ways instead of yelling at somebody that you could talk to them calmly, but it's like I go from this to like this right away, that anger.
Well,
It's just
Do you? Because you said it was one thing after another, right? And so it wasn't just like, bam, here you are. It was a buildup.
Yeah.
And so, like, in that, when that first thing happens, these things that happen that irritate us, that create that crunchiness, those happen because it's a call that we need to self-care. We need to give something to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But we ignore that. Well, I just need to push through. I need to do this. It's weak if I have to
Mm-hmm.
stop and take care of myself because this little thing created stress in me, or, like whatever stories we have. No, it's when we continuously ignore. And then finally, it's like, no, you need to fucking listen to me. You need something. You need attention. You need rest.
Yeah.
You need this. You need that. And so it's our inner guide trying to get our attention in any way that we can.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so then, boom, it comes out in anger or rage or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's all work, It's all
It's all
work
a
and
practice.
yeah. Yeah.
I
So,
had I had that feeling. It was an uncomfortable experience, but this one girl at work who, like, she sent this email that was just full of just energy. It was all caps lock, like she was yelling, and she included John and Deja. And she's like, all hands on board, because I work remotely Monday and Tuesday.
mhm.
And she used to, but we had pulled everybody back into the office for this transition. Um, while at the same time, John's like, Jen, you can just work from home every day. And I'm like, well, no, that doesn't feel good to me. Because my situation's a bit different, because I didn't know it was so freaking far away when I agreed. They didn't tell me about that. Anyway, but she responds with this just message. And I respond, and like I have like a harshness, not mean or anything. I was like, well, perhaps me, you, and John need to sit down and discuss what your specific needs are, if this is the energy that you're bringing to this. In the meantime, as I have said multiple times before, whatever you need help with, send to me so I can take it off your plate.
Mhm.
Right. And then she responds again with something snippy and everything. And then I was just like, I'm not. And then I went through this whole thing where I was like, I'm not even going to fucking respond to her. And then I was like, I'm going to talk to John and Deja and tell them I'm not even responding to her anymore. And I was like, why do I need to do that?
Right.
No reason.
Right.
It's just to
Yeah.
get the attention to
Mhm.
do exactly what she's doing. And then it was like me getting frustrated and having conversation with John. When I come in the next time, I'm like, well, why would I do that? What is it going
Mhm.
to get me? It's not necessary. And I was just brought face to face with all of these things that I would do to get the attention that she's doing right now.
Mhm.
Right? It's exactly what she's doing right now. She's acting like a child,
Yeah.
fucking child. Stop
Yeah.
throwing a temper tantrum and just do your job, or use your actual fucking words to have a communication. Then we can find a resolution. Right?
Mhm.
But that brought up in me all of the ways that I do exactly what she does. And
Yeah.
I was like, I'm gonna fucking do this. And I was like, why? No, that's just to do this, or I'm gonna do this, or I'm gonna do this. When I wanting everybody to see the injustice and see the horrible experience that I just had and how well I'm handling it, or
Yeah.
I've had enough for this or that or whatever. And I
Mhm.
was like, well, what happens if I just let it go
Yeah.
and not say anything, not do
Mhm.
anything, just keep on going with my day?
That is what I'm working on, is letting it go. And it's like, usually I do, but these last two people that I had altercations with, I just could not let it go. It just literally, and even with my husband, he's so like just so calm with everything and lets me be, but it's just like, he's like, sometimes you just need to let it go. Just let it be. Like, they are them. We cannot change who they are. Screaming at them, lashing out on them, it's not gonna fix the problem, it's not. And I know that, and I already know. It's just, I guess I was just at my breaking point, and I I do. Most of the time I try to just let it go and be like, whatever. I'm not gonna dwell on it. I'm not gonna even think about that, but it just, I don't know. It came out of me.
And
Hmm.
then the question that we get to ask ourselves when there's something that we can't let go, right? is, what do I get by doing this? Because
Mhm.
we're getting something, and that's why we keep doing it.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
getting something that we can't see, our conscious mind can't see that we could get somewhere else.
Mhm.
And so once we allow ourselves to identify that, and that takes a lot of like getting really fucking humble,
Mhm.
because yelling at people, you don't want to seem like you're getting something from it. You don't want to seem like you're enjoying it.
Mm-mm.
But that's the way that you get to identify what gets you to keep doing it, because there is something that you're getting from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I just kept saying, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. Doing my whole Ho'oponopono prayer and um yeah, just letting it go,
Yeah.
just forgiving myself and saying sorry to them and sorry to myself and
Mm-hmm.
you know, so
It's been a lot of that these last few weeks.
yeah. And
Like,
we're all human, we all make mistakes,
yeah,
and we're not perfect at all. And I get that.
but
But
we're
please
also
forgive
perfect
me.
in those imperfections. Like, perfection
Absolutely.
doesn't exist without imperfection.
Hmm.
And in that, like, even going back to that word mistake, right? Breaking that up, thinking about being on a movie set, right? They don't only take one take and then it's done.
Hmm.
No, a mistake. We missed this take, so we get to retake it.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, that's
Yep.
what it is. And
Hmm.
it's practice. We're all fucking practicing here. It's not about having it perfect or doing it
Hmm.
correct and right and all of it. It is a practice, and it's going to change. It's never going to be the same.
Hmm.
Every moment
No.
there's going to be something different that's more aligned
Hmm.
than what it was a moment ago.
No.
And so giving ourselves that grace.
Hmm. Mm. Yes.
All right, sister.
All
Have a
right.
beautiful day. I will see you this evening
Yes.
with dance practice so we can get
Yes.
that second set up, and then tomorrow we'll go over everything.
Yes. Sounds good. Peace, love, and harmony. Thank you,
Much love.
Blissful.
Mwah.
Yes. Love you, sister.
Love you
Have a
very
beautiful
much.
night.